Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into a topic that's both fascinating and, let's be honest, a little bit contentious. India's linguistic landscape.
It's a topic you can't really avoid if you're looking at India. It's everywhere, from everyday conversations to high-level policy debates.
Absolutely. And it seems like there's always something new happening, whether it's a controversy over language in education or a debate about which language should be used in official settings.
Exactly. And one of the biggest challenges is trying to reconcile this incredible linguistic diversity with the need for some sense of national unity.
Right. It's this constant balancing act, trying to preserve and celebrate all these different languages and cultures while also fostering a sense of shared identity.
Definitely. And I think that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not just about language itself, but about how language intersects with identity, politics, culture, and all these other really important aspects of Indian society.
Absolutely. So where do we even begin with a topic this complex? I guess a good place to start might be with this idea of a Hindi landslide. The notion that Hindi is overwhelmingly dominant across India. But is that really accurate?
That's a great question, and it's one that often gets oversimplified in the media. Yeah, if you look at the raw numbers from the 2011 census, it does seem like Hindi is spoken by a huge chunk of the population. Something like 43.63% of Indians declared Hindi as their mother tongue.
Wow, that's a pretty significant number.
Hmm.
So is the Hindi landslide narrative actually true then?
Well, not so fast. Remember, we're talking about a country with over 1 billion people spread across a vast and diverse geographical area. So just looking at a national percentage doesn't give us the whole picture.
Gotcha. So there's more to the story than just that one number.
Exactly. The key is to look at regional variations, because when you do that, you see a very different picture emerging.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What do you mean by regional variations?
Right. Well, for example, there are 12 states and union territories, mainly in the South, where less than 5% of the population speaks Hindi as their mother tongue.
So in those regions, Hindi is not the dominant language at all. It's like assuming everyone in India loves spicy food just because some regions are known for their fiery curries.
That's a great analogy. It highlights how you can't just generalize from one part of India to the whole. You have to consider the specific cultural and linguistic contexts of each region.
And that makes me think of the three-language formula, which has been a source of debate and controversy for decades. Can you remind us how that policy was supposed to work? I always get a bit muddled about the details.
Sure. Basically, the three-language formula, which was implemented back in 1968, was an attempt to create a kind of linguistic balance across India.
Okay, a balance between what and what?
It was intended to balance the promotion of Hindi as a national language with the recognition of regional languages.
So everyone would learn Hindi, but also their own regional language. And then
Yeah.
I guess English was thrown in there too.
Exactly. The idea was that students in North India would learn a South Indian language, students in the South would learn Hindi, and everyone, regardless of region, would also learn English. At least that was the idea.
Right. It sounds, well-intentioned, I guess, on the surface. But I have a feeling it wasn't quite that simple in practice, was it?
You're right to be skeptical. The three-language formula might have looked good on paper, but it faced a lot of resistance, especially in the South, particularly in Tamil Nadu, which has always been very protecting of its linguistic identity.
Tamil Nadu, I remember reading about that. They opted for a two-language formula instead, right?
Yeah.
Sticking with Tamil and English.
Exactly. They flat out rejected the inclusion of Hindi. And this resistance wasn't just about, the practicalities of learning another language. It was a much deeper statement about regional autonomy and cultural preservation.
So it was about, pushing back against this idea of Hindi being imposed on them.
Precisely. And Tamil Nadu's stance on this issue has had a long-lasting impact on the language debates in India. It's still a major point of contention today.
Which brings us to the National Education Policy, or NEP, as it's commonly known, the one that was introduced in 2020.
Yes. The NEP reignited the whole debate with its proposal for a three-language system.
And that led to a bit of a clash, right, between the DMK in Tamil Nadu and the BJP at the national level.
Oh, absolutely. The DMK saw the NEP as another attempt to impose Hindi, while the BJP defended it as a way to promote both national unity and multilingualism.
So are we essentially talking about a debate that's about way more than just education policy?
Oh, definitely. These language debates are deeply intertwined with issues of power, identity, and regional autonomy.
So when we hear politicians talking about language, We need to listen for those underlying messages about like who holds power and how different groups see themselves within the larger context of India.
Exactly. It's like language becomes a proxy for all these bigger social and political tensions.
It's fascinating how something as seemingly simple as language can become so politically charged.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting to think about this whole idea of India as a multilingual society, because it's often presented as if everyone in India is effortlessly switching between multiple languages all the time.
Right. I think I've definitely fallen for that stereotype.
Oh, we all have. But the reality, as always, is a bit more complicated.
Okay, so let's dig into that. What does the data tell us about actual multilingualism in India?
Well, according to the census, only about 26.02% of Indians are bilingual, and a mere 7.1% are trilingual.
Wow. Those numbers are way lower than I would have expected.
It's a good reminder that even though India has an incredible number of languages, not everyone is fluent in multiple languages.
So the idea of this seamlessly multilingual society is a bit of a myth.
It's an oversimplification, that's for sure. And here's another fun fact that might surprise you. The state with the highest percentage of multilingual speakers isn't one of the Hindi-speaking heartland states, it's Goa.
Goa, really? That's not what I would have guessed at all.
I know, right? It seems like they're quietly leading the way in multilingualism, with 77.21% bilingual speakers and over 50% who speak 3 or more languages.
That's amazing. So even within this idea of a multilingual society, there are so many variations and nuances depending on which region you're looking at.
Absolutely. And that makes me wonder, what are the most common language combinations people are actually using in India?
Yeah, let's get specific. What does the data tell us about that?
Well, the most common bilingual pairing is Marathi Hindi, followed by Hindi English. But here's a twist. Tamil English and Telugu English are also in the top 10 most common pairings.
So English is a major player in the mix.
Definitely. And when you look at trilingual combinations, the most common one is Marathi Hindi English, which kind of shows you how these languages are clustering together based on where people live and the cultural influences in those regions.
This is reminding me that we can't forget about Urdu, which is often at the center of its own linguistic battles.
Absolutely. The Urdu controversy in Uttar Pradesh is a perfect example of how language gets intertwined with politics and identity in a really complex way.
Let's unpack that a bit. What exactly happened in Uttar Pradesh with Urdu?
Recently, there were protests in Uttar Pradesh organized by the Samajwadi Party, or SP for short. They were protesting the removal of Urdu from the list of languages used for assembly translations.
So they stopped translating assembly proceedings into Urdu. Why would they do that?
Well, the government added several dialects that are related to Hindi in place of Urdu. These dialects include Awadhi, Bhojpuri, Braj, and Bundeli.
Ah, I see. So Urdu was replaced with languages that are arguably more closely aligned with Hindi, and obviously this decision didn't go over very well.
You got it. The SP argued that Urdu is a vital part of Uttar Pradesh's cultural heritage, and removing it was a form of marginalization.
And what's the counter-argument? Why did the government decide to make this change?
Well, Yogi Adityanath, the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, argued that promoting Urdu actually hurt education. He implied that it gave too much emphasis to religious instruction, and that was somehow detrimental to other subjects.
Wow. So once again, we're seeing how these language decisions become flashpoints for much deeper issues about culture, religion, and who gets to decide what's important.
It's a classic example of how language can be used as a tool, both to include and exclude, to empower and disempower.
And just to throw in a few more interesting tidbits from the data, the state with the highest percentage of Urdu speakers isn't actually Uttar Pradesh, it's Karnataka.
Right. Which just goes to show that our assumptions about language distribution in India don't always line up with reality.
And speaking of unexpected stats, only 13,085 people in Uttar Pradesh listed English as their mother tongue, which is a tiny fraction of the population in a state where English is often seen as essential for economic opportunity.
That's such a fascinating point. It suggests that English might hold a lot of symbolic value as an aspirational language, even if it's not actually the language people speak at home.
This all points to a bigger idea that we need to keep in mind. These language debates aren't just about which language is better or more important. They're fundamentally about power, identity, and how those concepts play out in a society as diverse and complex as India.
You've hit the nail on the head, and it's a reminder that these linguistic battles are a reflection of deeper social and political tensions that are playing out all across India.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already. From debunking the myth of the Hindi landslide to exploring the complexities of the three-language formula and uncovering some surprising data about multilingualism and language distribution. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it's crucial to address the elephant in the room, the politicization of language and what it means for India's future.
You're absolutely right. That's where things get really interesting because language can be a powerful tool for unity, but it can also be a source of division and conflict.
So, how does India navigate this tricky terrain? How do they balance the desire for a shared national identity with the need to respect and preserve its incredible linguistic diversity?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that we'll be exploring in more detail in the next part of our deep dive. It's tricky, right? Because on one hand, you've got this need for a shared language, a way to communicate and connect across this vast and diverse country. But on the other hand, you have all these rich and vibrant languages that are so deeply tied to people's cultural identities.
It's almost like a paradox. You need a shared language for unity, but pushing too hard for that unity could end up undermining the very diversity that makes India so unique.
Exactly. And, it's important to remember that this whole debate isn't happening in a vacuum. It's layered on top of centuries of history, including the legacy of colonialism.
Ah, right. The British and their whole English is the language of power and prestige thing. I guess you could say that still casts a long shadow over the language landscape today.
Absolutely. English was the language of administration, education, and upward mobility during British rule. So even after independence, it retained a lot of that symbolic power.
And then when India became independent, there was this push to establish a national language, right? To kind of create a sense of unity and break away from the colonial past.
Exactly. And Hindi, being the most widely spoken language at the time, was seen as the natural choice for many. But of course, not everyone agreed.
Especially in the South, right? Where there was a lot of resistance to the idea of Hindi being imposed on them.
Exactly. And that's where the three-language formula came in as a way to try to appease both sides. But as we saw earlier, it didn't really work out that way. The resistance to Hindi in the South, particularly in Tamil Nadu, has been very strong and persistent.
So it's not just about language itself, it's about all these deeper issues of identity, power, and who gets to control the narrative.
Precisely. And it's even more complicated when you consider that language is so deeply intertwined with cultural and even religious identities in India.
Right, like you've got Sanskrit, which holds a lot of historical and religious significance for Hindus, and then there's Arabic and Persian, which have been influential in Islamic traditions, and then, of course, all the regional languages that are so vital for preserving local cultures and traditions.
Exactly. It's like a tapestry woven together from all these different threads. And when politicians try to manipulate language for their own purposes, they're essentially tugging on those threads, which can have all sorts of unintended consequences.
It's almost like they're playing with fire, right? Appealing to linguistic identity can be a really powerful way to mobilize support, but it can also backfire and create more division and conflict.
Absolutely. And that's where the potential consequences become really worrying, because if people start to feel like their language, and by extension their culture and identity, is being threatened, things can escalate very quickly.
We've seen that happen in other parts of the world, right? Where language has been used as a tool to marginalize or oppress certain groups. And in a country as diverse as India, the stakes are even higher.
Exactly, because in the end, we're not just talking about words on a page. We're talking about people's lives, their sense of belonging, their access to opportunities, their ability to participate fully in society.
So where do we go from here? How does India move forward in a way that respects all these different languages and cultures while still fostering a sense of national unity? It seems like such a delicate balancing act.
It is, and there's no easy answer, but I think one important step is to move away from this zero-sum mentality where promoting one language is seen as a threat to all the others.
So it's not about Hindi versus Tamil or English versus everyone else. It's about finding a way for all these languages to coexist and thrive.
Precisely. India already has a long and rich tradition of multilingualism. Think about how people naturally switch between languages in their daily lives depending on who they're talking to and what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's like this amazing ability to adapt and code switch to navigate between different linguistic worlds.
Exactly. And I think that's something to be celebrated and encouraged, not suppressed.
So instead of trying to force everyone to speak one language, we should be creating an environment where people can learn and use multiple languages. not just for practical reasons like getting a job or navigating different parts of the country, but also for the sheer joy of it.
Absolutely. Imagine if kids in India could grow up learning their mother tongue, a regional language, Hindi, and English. They'd be able to communicate with so many more people, access a wider range of information and opportunities, and develop a much richer understanding of their own culture and the cultures of others.
That's a pretty amazing vision. A whole generation of multilingual superheroes, basically.
I love that. But the question is, how do we make that a reality? How do we move beyond just talking about multilingualism to actually creating a system that supports and encourages it?
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? Because good intentions only get you so far. What are some of the concrete steps that need to be taken to make this vision of a truly multilingual India a reality?
Well, for starters, I think we need to start early, like really early. We need to strengthen mother tongue-based multilingual education, especially in those crucial early years.
Ah, so it's about laying the groundwork, making sure kids feel comfortable and confident expressing themselves in the language they know best before they start learning other languages.
Exactly. Research has shown time and time again that kids learn best when they start with their mother tongue. It helps them develop their cognitive skills, and it also fosters a sense of pride in their own linguistic heritage.
It's like you're saying, hey, your language is valuable, your culture is valuable. And that's a really powerful message to send to kids, especially in a country as diverse as India.
Exactly. And practically speaking, this means investing in creating high-quality teaching materials in all of India's different languages. And just as importantly, it means training teachers who are proficient in multiple languages and who understand how to teach in a multilingual setting.
So it's not just about the curriculum. It's about making sure teachers have the resources and the support they need to do this work effectively.
Exactly. And it's a long-term investment, but I think it's one that would pay off in huge ways, not just for the kids themselves, but for Indian society as a whole.
Because imagine a generation of kids who grow up feeling comfortable and confident using multiple languages. That would be a game changer.
Absolutely. And it's not just about kids. We need to create more opportunities for adults to learn new languages as well.
Yeah, it's never too late to learn a new language, right?
Exactly. We could offer more language courses, set up online platforms for language exchange, even incentivize businesses to encourage multilingualism in the workplace.
It's about creating a culture of lifelong language learning, a
Yep.
culture where acquiring new languages is seen as a positive and enriching experience.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the practical benefits like getting a job or traveling to different parts of the country. It's also about the cultural enrichment and the personal growth that comes with learning a new language.
It's about expanding your horizons and connecting with people who might be different from you.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really important piece of this puzzle, addressing those underlying attitudes and biases that often fuel language conflicts.
Yeah, it's not enough to just change policies. We have to change hearts and minds as well.
Exactly. We need to move away from this us versus them mentality and start thinking about how we can create a more inclusive and equitable linguistic landscape for everyone.
So it's about recognizing that every language has value.
Yeah.
Every culture has something to contribute.
Absolutely. And I think education, media, and even pop culture can play a huge role in promoting more positive and inclusive narratives about India's linguistic diversity.
Yeah. Imagine a world where Bollywood movies regularly feature characters speaking different languages, or where TV shows are subtitled in multiple languages.
Exactly. It's about normalizing multilingualism and showing people that it's a strength, not a weakness.
And it's not just about what the government or the media does. It's about each of us taking responsibility for challenging stereotypes and promoting respect for all of India's languages.
You've hit the nail on the head. It starts with those everyday conversations. It starts with being curious about other languages and cultures. It starts with being willing to step outside of our comfort zones.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of this amazing tapestry woven together by all these different languages and cultures.
Exactly. And that's what makes India so unique and so beautiful.
I couldn't agree more. Well, this has been a fascinating and thought-provoking deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from debunking the myth of the Hindi landslide, to exploring the complexities of the three-language formula, to envisioning a future where India embraces its multilingualism as a source of strength and unity.
It's been a real pleasure discussing this with you. It's a topic that's close to my heart, and I hope our listeners have found it as engaging as we have.
Me too. And I hope this conversation has inspired some of our listeners to go out and learn a new language, to challenge their own assumptions about language and culture, and to be part of building a more inclusive and vibrant India.
That would be fantastic.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap things up for today. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.